and welcome to the pilot episode of the science fiction Affliction. For today's episode, I'm going to be talking about Star Trek. Also, I'm Jay Oldenkamp, the host.
And I'm here today, Max.
Okay, so for the science fiction Affliction, each week we'll have a topic. And like I said before, this week's is Star Trek. Next week, I plan to do cyberpunk as next week's topic. Let's get into it. So, Star Trek was created by Gene Roddenberry, and he wanted a concept of a wagon train to the stars. This was something different. Usually, in the shows back in the '60s were mostly like cop shows or westerns. Westerns were still a big thing back then, like Gunsmoke or Bonanza, for example. And in 1964, he created the pilot episode "The Cage" and aired it at CBS. That episode failed, but the higher-ups at CBS later said that we'll give you another chance. Now, that episode, "The Cage," became a two-part episode of the Menagerie later for Star Trek later on. Also, more interesting facts about The Cage. They wanted the higher-ups in CBS wanted Gene Roddenberry to drop Spock, which is like, what? But they wanted to drop Spock because he had the pointed ears, which were like demonic looking, and they didn't want to be associated with that. And so we go fast forward to 1965, September 22nd. That's when the first official episode of Star Trek aired, and that was Where No Man Has Gone Before. Star Trek had the original series had a total of 80 episodes, and it lasted for 3 seasons. And that last episode was aired June 3rd of 1969.
Can I interject for a second?
Yeah, no problem.
The Cage tied into Star Trek. Was that like a pre-sequel series?
So The Cage originally had Robert April as the captain, and had a yeoman who was Gene Roddenberry's. Well, she wasn't Gene Roddenberry's wife. Then it was Major Barrett. I can't remember the last name at the moment. And she later plays Nurse Christine Chapel in Star Trek original series and in original movies. But she was like the second, like one of the higher ups in that pilot episode. And the episode's stuff. The names got scrapped and got changed when it became the Menagerie. The Menagerie, the Enterprise of James Kirk gets a distress call from a planet, and there's this crashed ship. They have to go. The survivors of this crashed ship say, "Oh, we've been here for so many years," and it was just this girl, if I remember right. It's been a while since I've seen the episode. And then Kirk beams down there, and he becomes part. The girl was a trap to lure Kirk down to the planet, and Kirk becomes part of this menagerie, which is a zoo for these other aliens. And then there's bits and pieces of the original Cage episode are put into it, and a captain of the ship beforehand. So let's go back a bit for more information. Before Kirk, there was Christopher Pike, who was the captain, and then he was lost.
Whoops.
Yeah. In space or whatever. And so James Pike. Shit, I'm trying to remember here. No.
Long pause, awkward silence.
Yeah, awkward silence. Yeah, I might be wrong. Well, no, he was lost or he was injured. So I remember he was injured in a TV show. He was injured, and then he was No, he was injured. Yeah, he was injured, and then so James Pike was the captain of the Enterprise before, and then when we go back to the Cage pilot and the pieces they put into the Menagerie, James Pike is now the captain instead of Robert April, if that makes any sense whatsoever.
Okay.
Yes?
Instead of them, just kind of continuing on the story, they kind of, recycled some characters.
Yep, they recycled it, and they put... The bulk of that story was in it, but they had it to where these aliens captured them, And that was part of the story too.
Okay.
Yeah, so it was part of the story of the original Cage, and then they had James Kirk come down, and he later escaped, and then Pike stayed on the planet, I think, because he was horribly disfigured in a wheelchair.
All right.
If I'm right. If anybody's listening to this, please call me out and then correct me. Like I said, I haven't watched this episode for a good couple of years or so.
All right. So basically, they didn't restart after the pilot like some TV shows
No,
did. They tried to continue the story.
They continued with a completely different crew. Like I said, the new pilot episode, which was where no one has gone before, and with that episode, they have upon this planet, and it's like a mining planet or whatever, and two crewmen gain these like super like powers and become basically gods, and one of them is one of Kirk's friends, and eventually there's a male and a female. They both get these god powers. The guy gets crazy, becomes crazy with power, and then they like make and he wanted to bury Kirk alive. Remember, right? And then instead of Kirk getting buried alive in this pit, they trap the other guy who has just the god powers into the pit.
All right.
And they leave him stranded there. But yeah, anyway, let's go fast forward again to June 3rd, 1969. That's when the last episode aired, and it was canceled, but later became a huge cult success. And then in 1973 and in 74, there was between 1973 and 1974, there was the anime series, and there were about 22 episodes or so. Brought Mark Cannon into it. I watched some of the episodes. I can't watch through it. I might have to try another time to rewatch it. It was just kind of cheesy, It was for kids, so.
All right.
Yep. And between that, there was also the Star Trek movies, 1 through 6. And with the first Star Trek movie, there was the plans for that was Gene Roddenberry wanted to create a Star Trek Phase 2, which was another television show, but that got scrapped. But some of the costumes and like some of the ship models and set design were kept.
So they like learned from the errors and found what they liked.
Yep, and that was later put towards the Star Trek the original motion picture, which came out, and a lot of there's these they have these brand new uniforms, just like this one piece thing, and like I guess those are like really uncomfortable, so it took forever to get in and out of them. And then you see like later, like 2 through 6, they have completely different uniforms. Also to know, in the motion picture, that's where you first see where Klingons have the head ridges, which is completely different from what they were in the original series. The original series looked very oriental with dark skin, but they didn't have the ridges on their heads.
All right, so they like
it was a change in makeup.
Gave them a more defining feature to let you know that they were Klingons.
And interesting fact about that, in Enterprise, which came out in 2001, they explain how the Klingons got the head ridges. It was this new genetic disorder and some disease, and so that's why Klingons started having head ridges, which explains why there was a whole change between the original series and in the first movie, which answered a lot of questions for fans. And in 1987, Star Trek had another television show, which was The Next Generation, and that was a 2-part premiere with the encounter at Farpoint. And with that, we see a whole new crew, and it's about 100 years later from the original series.
Mm-hmm.
And then this is with the crew of the captain of Picard, and with the encounter at Farpoint, we basically get to know the crew. And what was interesting was there was 2 major things they introduced. First of all was Q, who is this omnipotent being that's basically a god who can do basically whatever the hell he wants to do. And what was also neat was that they had the guy who played Dr. McCoy, DeForest Kelly. He was in this episode. This is the only episode of The Next Generation that he guest starred in. But James Doohan, who played Scotty, he guest starred in an episode also later on the series for Next Generation, and then Spock. He was a major character for the Next Generation series. There was stuff with the Romulans, and Spock was leading this like underground resistance with the Romulans.
All right.
Yeah, and then there was also 2 other spin-off series within the Next Generation timeline, which were Deep Space Nine, which is between 1993 and 1999, and then Star Trek Voyager between 1995 and 2001. Of DS9, it was centered around the space station Deep Space Nine, and it didn't really have it did have some extra exploration here and there, but it was just a central focal point was at the station, and it had like it was like where it was a community. There we go, a community rather than exploration of space. And there was also the Dominion War, which happened in that time period too. Mm-hmm. And then we have Star Trek Voyager, which was with the USS Voyager, and it was a first for Star Trek. There was for an episode of for a series of Star Trek, I guess, to have a female captain take the lead. There was the Enterprise C, which had a female captain, I believe, but that was just several episodes of the Next Generation and not like a full actual series. And with Voyager, what happened was the ship went through transwarp and got sucked so far into space that they were stuck there, and they had to take the long way back basically to come back to Earth. They eventually do, and that was another neat thing, I guess.
All right.
Yeah. It also introduced that. What was neat in that episode, in that TV series, also was that they had a Borg crew member instead of. It was just something new. They had a Borg crew member, but it was 7 of 9, and she was she was a Borg, but then they, like with Picard, they did surgery and whatnot and made her not completely a Borg.
So, like, a cyborg?
Kind of, but not like too much. Like, she had some like Borg elements left, and like Picard had mostly they were gone, but with her she had some left. And then around when Voyager ended, there was Star Trek Enterprise. I really liked this TV series. I know it gets some flack for it because it did let it get weird with the Xindi alien species.
Fuck Bacula.
And fuck you too, Kian. With the Xindi alien species later on in later seasons. But if Enterprise is before the Star Trek original series timeline, and with that you have the United Federation of Planets hasn't even been created yet. There's the Federation is just called the Federation, and it's just a fledgling thing. This is like a couple decade or two after the timeline of First Contact, the First Contact movie, where you meet Zephyr Cochrane, and he has the first flight where he meets the Vulcans, and so you see the first episode takes off, and that's where you see that this Klingon crash lands on Earth, and he's injured, and then so they have to take the Klingon back to QNOS, or that way he's with his people, and it took off with that. And what was cool was that with the Enterprise, it was they had two things I think that was neat. One was that they had the more military-like aspect instead of space and exploration. They had the Mako unit, which was later introduced when the Xindi War happened, I think. Like I said, it's been a while since I watched any Star Trek so far. And also another cool thing was just watching how, you see, oh, cool, where they get, certain, where technology they had in, the later episodes of the later timelines of the Next Generation or an original series, they we created this here. It was neat to see how they created it, and now it's been implemented throughout the whole series.
Yeah, so this is a prequel series that
so
really
it's a prequel
the
series,
basis for a lot of what we got later.
And the very last episode of the series, there was two new two really neat things. One was like the whole like space to final frontiers, the voyage to the Starship Enterprise, blah blah blah. Mm-hmm. That speech was created by the character of Archer in the Enterprise, and in the last episode he has this huge speech he says, and then it like zooms out and then you see Commander Riker and Counselor Troy, and you see they're actually in the holodeck of the Enterprise, which was a nice little like, oh cool, you know, like,
awesome.
Yeah, so it was like nice to have them guest star cameo in the last episode of Enterprise.
Yeah.
And then so with that, Star Trek basically became like no more after 2005. And not until you hit around 2007 to 2008. Mm-hmm. I think when the newest Star Trek, when the first of the new Star Trek movies came out, which was Star Trek, it was just called Star Trek, but that J.J. Abrams directed, and we wouldn't see another new television show for Star Trek, but we still won't see one until September 24th, and that means it would have been between 2005 and 2017. It's been 12 years since there's been a last series of Star Trek, which is interesting in a sense to see they're bringing Star Trek back because of like the Star Trek movies. And besides like I said, the television shows, there's been 13 different movies. 6 of them have been within the original series universe.
Okay.
And then let's see, there was 3 with the Next Generation, mm-hmm. and then the other 3 were with the reboot series of movies that J.J. Abrams have started, and we won't talk about In the Darkness, which was a piece of shit. But besides that, if we move to the last movie that came out with Star Trek Beyond, that was not done by Abrams. He was producing that, but it was Justin Lin that directed the movie. What was really cool about that movie was that they had a huge shout out to the Enterprise TV show, because a major part of that movie is like they had found this NX class ship, and an NX class ship was a ship that the Enterprise was in Enterprise, and that was found on a planet, and it proved to be a huge major component because there was this rogue captain and his crew that were from that era, were the major villains of Star Trek Beyond. So that was like a nice shout out to any of the Star Trek fans who've been through most of it or whatnot. So besides that, going back to Discovery, I think I'm looking forward to the new Star Trek Discovery TV show that's coming out. And I know that the first 2 episodes will be on CBS, and then the rest of the season will be on CBS's exclusive streaming service, which I guess I'll have to watch. And then I will talk more about my thoughts on the new Star Trek Discovery TV show that will be coming out next month.
Okay.
And then I think Star Trek has also left a huge impact on society today, like, and just in general. Like, when Star Trek came out, it was a new genre of space TV show. It was like a more serious one. They had like new planets and stuff they explored each week, and it was like thinking in science and not just like straight pulp action. Also, for the first Star Trek series, it had like a different culture of crew. In the 1960s, we had the tension with the Russians. Mm-hmm. And there was a young. They had decided to have like a young Russian crew member in it. They had a black crew member. They had a crew member who was from Japan that was in it, which was neat because Gene Roddenberry wanted to show that in the future that we were united. We didn't have any more wars. We were just one federation we were just one Earth. We weren't a conflicted Earth. Like it was a utopia, kind of.
Well, at least a unison planet.
Yeah, it's a unison planet that didn't have to worry about that too much anymore.
Internal conflict as much.
And Star Trek, the original series, also was the first television series that had the first interracial kiss between a African American and a white person. It was a major groundbreaking thing.
Like I'm sure in the time that was huge.
In the 1960s, it was a huge thing.
It gave me hope.
God damn it, Keaton.
I knew you were old, but Jesus, Keaton.
How old are you? 20 something.
Apparently, he's like 70.
God damn. And besides those cultural impacts there, Star Trek has also inspired technology and whatnot, like with tricorders, the handheld computers of the series. We now have like smartphones that can do what tricorders can do. They can't like scan live sounds around, but like we have a small handheld computers. There's cell phones which has portable communication devices and other technology like that.
We're not far off from probably being able to do that.
No, we're not too. I don't think we are too far off either.
But it's showing. It's kind of idolizing what we could be and what we should be. So it's like, here's what we can be by, let's say, 2100, giving us ample time to blow shit up and start over.
Yes, exactly.
And so this is like a story of us being united and then going out and discovering
new civilizations more. And then making trying to form alliances and expanding and with conflict here and there. But Star Trek has been a lasting genre since 1960. I mean, a lasting just thing since 1965. There's conventions. There's one thing in Riverside, Iowa, every year. This celebrate Kirk's birthday.
Where what's his face was born.
Kirk, yeah. And but besides that, it was a groundbreaking thing. It continues to be something since '65. So it's over 50 years of Star Trek.
Yeah, that's awesome.
It's
been going for so long, and it's going well too. People haven't it hasn't died out. There have been slow points, these last 10 years or so.
Yeah, this last decade or so has been slow, but it's starting to pick up again, which is really nice to see. And like I said before, I have high hopes for Discovery. I hope it's going to be good, and it'll be successful, and more Star Trek will come off of this. And I'm assuming they'll probably have more Star Trek movies coming out or whatnot. Mm-hmm. And so that's about all I have for Star Trek. Like I said, if you have anything you want to critique, let me know. I will happily explain or correct in the next week's podcast. If you have any questions about next week's topic, which is cyberpunk, please put a question in the comments below. Please subscribe, and share the Roshan Bros Network. We are on Facebook, Podbean, and YouTube. Hopefully, eventually,
other places.
iTunes and other places.
Yeah.
So, I hope you enjoyed the science fiction Affliction. I'm your host, Jay Holdenkamp.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yep.